Bring your proof if you be truthful. That's what the Quran says. Jihad began when Islam was youthful, when the world still pays and pays. You see, pays rhymes with says. It's a visual rhyme. But we'll resist while we have breath, for we love life like they love death. And they do love death, ladies and gentlemen. We have seen that in a vivid manner this week. Welcome again to This Week in Jihad on a particularly somber Wednesday. We are here with the great David Wood, and we are looking at a week of more virulent and violent jihad than the world has seen in many a year. What's going on, David? What can you tell us?
Well, there was this guy named Muhammad once upon a time,
Mm-hmm. I'm
and
not sure there was.
well, I know, but not a lot of evidence to go on. You know what I'm saying?
That's for sure.
So the evidence, we can agree that the evidence is so sketchy that you can look at it and go, I don't even think this guy existed, and I can look at it and say, wow, this guy's so messed up. There's no way people made up this much weird stuff about this guy, and we can come to very different conclusions. But whether there was or was not this guy, there are people who believe in him, and they believe that he called for his followers to massacre
Mm-hmm.
Jews and said that, hey, the judgment's not going to come, the final hour is not going to come, you're not going to get your virgins until you go around exterminating these people. And this is the same guy who said that the most vehement in hostility towards the believers are the Jews and the mushrikun. So those are people who associate partners with Allah, but they're on the short list of people who are the ultimate enemies of Muhammad. And of course, Muhammad eventually decided to expel all Jews and all Christians from the Arabian Peninsula, leaving this interesting principle that, hey, if you're dominant, you can just make everyone else get out of there and say, hey, I don't appreciate religious pluralism very much, so everyone else get out of here. And so you've got this guy calling the shots, and then all of a sudden you have a country like Israel where Jews can completely overpower the Muslims who want to destroy them and carry out Muhammad's commands, and they don't know what to do. Because you're looking at this, notice from a psychological perspective, like this is not how the world is supposed to be. Islam's just supposed to expand and expand and expand. They're supposed to be running from us. They're supposed to be running from us and terrified of us, and yet they can completely dominate us. So what's going on here? They don't know what to do, and so just keep running up and trying to kill as many as possible, and that's where we are.
So on Saturday, there was a jihad raid all over Israel. 1,200 at the last count, people killed. In order to understand the magnitude of that, you have to understand that given the population of Israel, that would be the equivalent of about 30,000 people being killed in the United States on a single day. And so that's a massive attack on of a magnitude that the world has not seen since the days of the jihad massacres in India, which were extraordinarily violent, and elsewhere. But we're talking about that's hundreds of years ago now.
So you're saying proportionally, this is actually way worse than like 9/11 percentage
Yes,
wise. Yeah, as far as
that's
the
right.
the amount of the population that was actually affected, proportionally, is about 10 times worse than 9/11 for them.
Yes, because 9/11, of course, took place. 3,000 people killed in a country of 300 million. Whereas what's the population of Israel? Is it 12 million, I believe? I'm not sure, but in any case, you're talking about almost half of the casualty total of 9/11 in a significantly, substantially smaller country.
Mhm.
So this is a world historical event. We don't know how it will change the world, but we know that it will, and we know that the jihadis are already celebrating and considering it an immense victory because after all, if you believe that the God of the universe has commanded you to kill unbelievers, then killing unbelievers in large numbers is something that you assume is pleasing to the creator of the universe. And thus there is joy all over the world at this. And it's extraordinary, the outpouring of joy at the suffering and the misery of others. It's just nauseating from a non-Muslim point of view, but it's entirely understandable from a Muslim point of view. Anyway, lots of stories here about the Israeli attack, David. So let's get right into it. One of them actually is in line with what I was just saying. I don't know if you saw the image. I will see if I can. I should have gotten it before, but I apologize. There's been so much going on. The This young man here, he is somewhere in the United States. Behind him is a Boston Market, which is an American restaurant that is found all over the country. And so he's in the United States, but I don't know where. And he is holding up happily a photo on his phone of murdered Israelis. And you can see from his expression, he's very happy about this. In the larger video, all the people around him are cheering and joyful at these deaths. Now, this is something that's very jarring to our sensibilities, David, and I've already made an attempt to explain it, but can you unpack why on earth they would be happy about this a little bit more for us?
I mean, it's this super weird situation because, um, they think, we killed some of their guys, ha ha ha. This is so awesome, and they know what kind of retaliation they're going to bring here, but yeah, I mean, it goes back to, I mean, think about this when Muhammad is saying, um, the end won't come until you kill the Jews to the point where Jews are hiding and you're running around exterminating them. And for years, it's just seemed completely hopeless. How are we ever going to really get any of these guys when they're so much more powerful than us? And here you've actually managed to kill a number of soldiers and civilians and taken captives and so on. And it just gives these guys a glimmer of hope. Wait a minute, we're much more effective right now than we were 10 or 20 years ago. So maybe the tides are turning and we're
Mm-hmm.
actually going to get to completely exterminate this entire population in the name of Allah. And that's enough to bring them joy.
And notice about the hadith that you're making reference to, the end times, the last day will not come until Muslims kill Jews. And so Muslims killing Jews in large numbers, it's an eschatological act. It's hastening the end of time, the consummation of all things, and the final victory of Allah and the Muslims. And so it's a very big deal. It's something that they are all thrilled about because, of course, they all want the consummation of all things and the final victory of Islam. Meanwhile, another interesting thing that is a feature of what's been going on, David, is that there's been complete honesty, at least in some quarters, about what's going on. There is another video of a man, a Hamas member, who was captured. And he is being asked, why did you seize all those women and children? And this is what he answers: to rape them. You can see the full video, but he's not speaking in English. In any case, what is that all about? That has nothing to do with Islam, right?
Well, I noticed you grinning there even as you asked the question.
I try to keep a poker face on these
Yeah.
things, but I can't.
Yeah, so we all know we've got this ongoing problem in Islam, namely that if you get power over someone, you can take the women as sex slaves, and this happened in places like Khaybar. It even happened in Medina. But when you would conquer the Jews, you would kill the men, or in some, some men would survive, but the women, even if they were married and even if their husband survived, you could take the women as your sex slaves. And of course, you can marry them if you choose, or you can just keep them as your sex slaves, or you can keep them as your sex slaves for a little while and then sell them to another guy who will use them as sex slaves. But yeah, this is. I mean, it's part of jihad, taking captives. And I have to say, this is really where Muhammad started getting large numbers of converts. When he's just saying, "Hey guys, I'm a monotheist, and we should all just believe in one God," wasn't a terribly popular message. Once the message became, "Hey, if you join me and you fight for me, there are only two possible options," straight out of Bukhari. But there are only two possible options. Either we go out and you survive, in which case you get rewards in war, you take home your sex slaves, or or you die, in which case you spend eternity in paradise, deflowering virgins. So either way, you've got some sex slaves on your hands, and that's when he started getting lots and lots of converts to Islam.
Mm-hmm. And you know what's interesting also is that this is not something that is unknown in the modern world. Quite the contrary. After a long period in which we did not see this, at least as openly as we're seeing it now, we saw it with Boko Haram in Nigeria, and Michelle Obama holding up the sign, "Bring back our girls," and that worked. And we saw it with ISIS and the women in Syria and Iraq, the Yazidis primarily. And now we see it with Hamas. And even in the face of this repeated evidence that there are Muslims who take this seriously and consider it to be something that is permitted in Islamic religion, you still have people furiously saying this has nothing to do with Islam. And these people are just bandits, and that's why they're doing this kind of thing. And I think, how is it, once again, all the misunderstanders of Islam seem to misunderstand it in the same way? Isn't that odd?
One of life's great mysteries.
It is. It is. All right, we have various celebrations. In Canada, they were screaming a particular slogan, and it wasn't "This is MAGA country." It was...
All we are saying is give peace a chance.
That's right. That's what they were saying.
It's either that or Allahu Akbar, one or the other.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It was Allahu Akbar. But you knew that. The thing about this week in Jihad is, we could mail it in. We could do 10 shows or 100 shows in advance and then just fill in the blanks as to where and when and who. But otherwise,
by the
it's
way,
all the same.
it is interesting, the methodology, because as evil as it is a sound methodology, given the atmosphere that we're in the world. So it's okay, if Hamas goes in and kills a bunch of Jews, then we can celebrate the killing of a bunch of Jews. But we know Israel is going to retaliate. And then when they retaliate, we can say, look what the Jews are doing. We're victims. We're victims. Oh my goodness, look at the persecution. And they know that. And so notice, like, you've got Muslims around the world who are willing to engage in this, and they claim that they care about the Palestinians, that this is about caring about the Palestinians, when a bunch of Palestinians are going to die over this, and you're celebrating it because why? Because it's all part of the real agenda. And so the real agenda is not protecting some group of people or protecting Muslims who are in the Gaza Strip or anything like that. They're all pawns. They're all pawns in what you really want. And so notice it's they can celebrate this because every time it happens, every time Hamas goes and kills a bunch of people or fires rockets or anything like that, they know, okay, we can cheer for Hamas and what they did here. Then as soon as there's the retaliation, we can all go, oh my goodness, look at how we're being we're being victimized here. Poor us, poor us. And they know it and they love it. It's wild.
Well, it always works. You gotta respect what works. And for some reason, the infidels in the West are so stupid that they fall for this again and again and again, and they think, oh dear, these poor victims, we have to stand with them in solidarity. And so we have seen leftists, in Sydney, Australia, at the Sydney Opera House, there was a big demonstration, a lot of Muslims out there, a lot of leftists, and the Muslims start chanting. They had a new chant, David, in Sydney. It wasn't just Allahu Akbar, but it was also gas the Jews.
Yeah, I saw that one.
The leftists didn't bat an eye. They didn't say, oh, I can't believe you're saying this. I'm leaving. This is a bridge too far. It doesn't seem to make any difference. It's really astonishing.
Yeah, and it kind of lets the cat out of the bag about what the real agenda is, because you've got after every one of these wars, you have the Muslims who come out and say, well, our problem is not with the Jews. Our problem is just with Zionism. Yeah, we love Jews. Ordinarily, we would love Jews in spite of everything our prophet said about slaughtering them in the name of Allah and subjugating them and so on. But man, yeah, it's just the Zionists. When in reality, we've got the claims of Muhammad and the Quran, and we've got 14 centuries of history to judge by. But then you have people saying, gas the Jews, gas the Jews. Notice it's not, hey, gas the Zionists, it's gas the Jews. So yeah, they always let the cat out of the bag. And you've had Muslim scholars in various lectures and so on doing the same thing. They've said over and over again, yes, we hate the Jews because of Israel, but we'd hate them anyway because of what Islam teaches. So either way, we're going to hate you and celebrate your death. And that is the more realistic picture of what's going on. Yes, people are upset over Israel, but yeah, they'd have a problem with Jews either way.
Indeed. And that coincides actually with the left's problem with Jews, which is less known. But when you've got a lot of collectivists, Marxists, communists, they don't like an ethnicity that refuses to assimilate and give up all its unique traditions in order to join the collective. And so it just all fits together. Anyway, speaking of being completely honest about what they're doing, or the mask slipping, we have Hamas military commander Mohammed Daif. And he said, "This is the day that you make the criminal enemy understand that its time is up. Kill them wherever you may find them."
Huh.
Where did he hear that, David? Kill them wherever you may find them. That's not a quote of anything, is it?
Yeah, you have these commands. So people are most familiar with Surah 9, verse 5. But in Surah 2, verse 191, you have this command to kill them wherever you find them. And that's actually, I mean, in context, it's about Mecca, but that's the passage that says, drive them out from whence they drove you out. And so Muhammad and his followers had to flee Mecca for Medina, and then you get the command to drive them out from whence they drove you out. But you've had Muslim scholars for centuries who have applied this to any land that Muslims ever conquer. If you get driven out of it, you have to go back and keep fighting for it. And so, kill them wherever you find them. And that's being applied to driving them out from where they drove you out. And so, yeah, pretty straightforward.
And I thought it was interesting also that kill them wherever you find them is a Quran verse that pretty much universally the Islamic apologists of our own day will say, oh, that doesn't apply to anything in the modern age. That only had to do with, if you read it in Arabic, and if you read it in context, you would know, you ignorant Islamophobe, that only had to do with Muhammad fighting the pagan Arabs of Mecca, and not with anything having to do with anything after the 7th century. And yet here's a Hamas commander, somehow he didn't get the memo. I don't understand that.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you say that Islam has a death penalty for apostates, and they call you liar for 2 decades, and then they come out bragging about it. Of course, we're going to kill apostates, or really any one of these issues. They call you a liar. You're a liar. You're a liar. Oh, you say that Islam promotes child marriage. What a liar! What an Islamophobe! And then they come out and say, oh, okay, of course we support child marriage, and we want everyone to support child marriage. That's what Islam is all about. But you're still an Islamophobe for not supporting child marriage. And so it's you're an Islamophobe if you point out what the Quran says. You're an Islamophobe if you point out that what it's obviously saying, and they say no, it doesn't teach that, even though that's exactly what it's obviously saying. But
Hmm.
then they'll turn around and call you an Islamophobe once they agree that you're right.
Yep.
So
Yeah, it's amazing.
no matter what happens, you're an Islamophobe.
They said I was a liar for 20 years when I said what they say now, and now they say I'm a liar anyway. Even though everything I have said they have confirmed to be true. It's
Yep.
just one of them things. Anyway, we also have Fatah, which is the an arm of the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is the ruling group, of course, in the Palestinian Authority that is in the West Bank, as opposed to Gaza, where Hamas prevails. And Fatah joined in the fun, actually, on Saturday, in the evil, I should say, so nobody gets me wrong here. I'm not being serious when I say fun. It's bitter sarcasm. And they say, fight them, and Allah will punish them by your hands and put them to shame. Now, that also is a quotation from the Quran, chapter 9, verse 14. It's very important. What is the upshot of that? Fight them, and Allah will punish them by your hands. What does that mean, David?
Yeah, you have this theme that runs through the Quran that that you're doing stuff, but it's actually Allah doing this stuff through you, and so you're going around killing people, but it's actually your instruments in the hand of Allah for killing these people. So
Mm-hmm.
you don't get all the bragging rights. Keep in mind, it's Allah doing these things through you.
And so this is very important because in the Jewish and Christian tradition, in Deuteronomy 32:35, as well as in Romans 12:19, you have vengeance is mine, says the Lord. But there is no such concept in Islam. Vengeance belongs to the Muslims who are the executors of the wrath of Allah. Fight them and Allah will punish them by your hands. And so the people who are doing the killing and the raping among the Hamas members in Israel these days, they actually believe that they are righteous and that they are doing the will of Allah in extending his divine judgment over the infidels, and particularly the Jews, the worst enemies of the Muslims, as per the Quran as well. That's chapter 5, verse 82, ladies and gentlemen. All right, David, there's so much more. Let's see. When there was a intelligence, quite a lot of actually intelligence failures involved in this attack, and jihadis were able to enter into Israel proper and kill people wholesale, as well as take the hostages and the women they were going to rape and so on. And one of the things that they did with tremendous impunity, because they had managed to fool, as per Muhammad's dictum, war is deceit, they'd managed to fool the Israeli military into thinking there was no imminent threat at the Gaza border. So there were no troops around at the Gaza border. So they showed up with a bulldozer and bulldozed the fence, and then were able to pour into Israel. And they were, as they bulldozed the fence, there were people who were yelling, once again, Allahu Akbar. And of course, this just I mention it just to situate the fact that for these people, this is a holy struggle. This is practically a sacramental act. It is something that it's an act of religious devotion. It's not just undifferentiated mayhem and thuggery.
And that's the rough part. There is Israel keeps adapting to the new tactics of Hamas, but then Hamas sees what the response is, and then they adapt their own they come up with new tactics and so on. So it's not this situation where, hey, you build a fence or build a wall or something like that and the problem goes away. They're they are obsessed. Hamas is obsessed with finding ways around the defenses. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the rough part here is they've just been shown they can actually do it and get away with it, in the sense that they can actually accomplish a goal of killing a lot of people. Um, and so, yeah, it's rough because now the takeaway message is, hey, even though there's going to be a pretty significant backlash to crush our hopes for the future, they're still going to have hope for the future, just because that this attack was way more successful than they've been in a really, really long time.
And here again, it's an eschatological thing. And so if Allah doesn't give them victory this time, He'll give them victory next time. And they're supremely patient in a way that the infidels have never been patient. And they understand they're fighting a war that's been going on for 1,400 years.
And they view all this stuff now as like a test from Allah, like Allah's testing your will and your relentlessness. And that's one of the two directions that people could go in based on the events of the last century. I mean, if you're just reading the Muslim sources and you say what's going to happen, it's, well, Islam is going to keep expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding until the entire world is subjugated and all religion is for Allah. And then you get to the 20th century and all of a sudden, wait a minute, they look around, wait a minute, Western nations are way more powerful than us. What's going on here? And one possible interpretation of that is, okay, Islam has just got some things wrong and we need to adapt and we need to modernize and become like Western nations. And that's why you can go to pictures from like the 1960s of Afghanistan and Iran, and they look pretty similar to Western nations. They were trying to modernize and they were trying to become like Western nations. But that's not the only direction. That's not the only interpretation you come up with. The other interpretation is that Allah isn't giving you the victory because you haven't been devout enough in applying Sharia and you've been wishy-washy and you guys don't crack down on heresy in your own communities and so on. And so the solution, if you really want victory, is to become much more devout and obsessed with following everything Muhammad taught. And that's the mentality of various terrorist groups. That was the mentality of ISIS. That's why they went around killing Shias, killing everyone who disagreed with them about anything, or subjugating them and making them sex slaves. But it was about cleansing the Muslim community so that Allah will bless them to then go out and expand. Blew up in their faces, but you'd expect them to learn their lesson there. But you still have that mentality. That was the mentality behind the revolution in Iran. It's the same thing with ISIS, and it's the same for groups like Hamas. Allah is testing us. There's an obstacle here. He's testing our faith. He's testing our resolve. And so eventually, if we just keep showing him how devoted we are to Allah and Muhammad by continually laying down our lives, he'll eventually bless us to have complete victory over them.
Indeed. It's also worth noting in the connection with all that the one feeds against the other, that they are in conflict with one another. That when you mention the Iranian Revolution in 1979, it was a revolution against the people who were Muslims, who thought that part of the problem was that they were being too fanatical about Islam and they needed to follow the pattern of the West and modernize in the Western fashion. That's what the Shah was doing, and that's one of the reasons why he was overthrown. Kemal Ataturk in Turkey, who was a scoundrel in other ways, he also founded modern Turkey in an atmosphere of a rejection of political Islam. And he was actually quite explicit about it. He said, Islam is the theology of an immoral Bedouin, and it is a dead thing. And he thought that the reason why the Ottoman Empire had lost in World War I was because of Islam. And so he restricted Islam in secular Turkey. But then there was always the backlash from Muslims in Turkey and elsewhere who thought that he was a terrible infidel and was going to bring the wrath of Allah onto the country by his lack of faith, and that they needed to reassert Islam for Turkey to prosper. And that, of course, is the position of the current president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Anyway, lot more about Israel. In New York, there was a pro-Hamas demonstration. And I just find it amazing there were pro-Hamas demonstrations anywhere. Or, strictly speaking, they were demonstrations in favor of the Palestinians. But it was made abundantly clear on Saturday that if you're in favor of the Palestinians, Hamas is the one controlling what happens as far as the Palestinians go. And they're incredibly bloodthirsty and vicious. And so to come out in the wake of that, and in the wake of the human suffering we have seen since then, in favor of that, I just find it astonishing. But this young man here at the rally in New York City, you see that he's gotten the Nazi symbol on his phone, and he is displaying it where some people who were demonstrating in favor of Israel would see it. Now, why would he do that, David? What was that going? What was that all about?
Well, it seems to parallel what's going on the opposite side of the world with the calls for gassing the Jews.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The gassing the Jews is, of course, something that the Nazis actually did, and so this is one of the reasons why Hitler is popular in the Islamic world. Mein Kampf is a perennial bestseller in countries like Turkey and Egypt. The Mufti of Jerusalem, who led pogroms against the Jews in Jerusalem before the founding of the State of Israel in the 1920s, he lived in Berlin during the war, met with Hitler, made broadcasts in Arabic to the Islamic world, quoting the Quran, telling them they should join the Nazis. Anyway, that affinity still remains. Meanwhile, let's see what else we have. We have quite a lot. Oh, this was interesting. Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar, the great university, the great center for theological learning, the foremost institution in Sunni Islam, and also, David, the center of interfaith dialogue with Ahmed al-Tayyib, the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar, being pals with Pope Francis, and making this accord with him a few years back where they said that violence had nothing to do with religion. And I thought, man, Al-Tayyib must have been laughing up his sleeve when he made this agreement. But anyway, Al-Azhar, contrary to this agreement, came out the other day with a couple of tweets. Al-Azhar salutes with pride the efforts of the Palestinian people, calling on the world and the international community to look with reason and wisdom at the longest occupation in modern history, etc., etc. And the Palestinian people restored our confidence, breathed spirit into us, and restored life to us after we thought it would never return again. And mind you, they're talking about mass murders of Jews did all this.
Yeah, that is amazing stuff. So, I mean, on the one hand, you've got this is the Al-Azhar, that's the intellectual capital of the Muslim world, and that's why so many students in the world, when they decide where they want to go, go to school, everyone wants to go to Al-Azhar. That'd be a great place to go to learn science and everything else you could possibly want to learn. So this is supposedly the intellectual capital of the Muslim world, but then, wait a minute, we were dying, we were fading away, but now slaughtering a bunch of random Jews and slaughtering families and raping women and shooting kids, that breathed life into us.
It's incredible, and also I should note, I saw somebody here mention it, that there is no actual occupation, that according to international law, that a whole territory of Israel and Jordan as well as the so-called Palestinian territories, they were all set aside for a Jewish national home. And no other country owns them. There was never a country of Palestine that owned this territory. There's no occupation. Israel owns all this land. It's just trying to work out a modus vivendi with the Palestinians, which is virtually impossible. Meanwhile, in Istanbul, David, Istanbul or Constantinople, there were demonstrators. They were also screaming Allahu Akbar, and they also said Khaybar, Khaybar.
Mm.
No, what's that? What is that all about?
If I were Muslims, that would really be the last thing I would ever be yelling, if they actually knew what happened as a result of all of that. So, but it fits in perfectly with them not understanding the concept of how things will be worse for them due to retaliation. So, hey, we killed some Jews, and now we want to brag about it. And so the tendency for a while has been for this Khaybar Khaybar shout, which refers to Muhammad and his followers attacking the Jews of Khaybar. conquering them, taking women and girls as their sex slaves, and then forcing the survivors to pay jizya, which was 50% of their annual produce. So they look at that and say, "Aha! You see, we conquered the Jews of Khaybar, and we're going to do that again." And they don't realize that it was a Jewish woman after the Battle of Khaybar who was so ticked off because Muhammad had slaughtered all the men in her family that she decided to prepare a nice meal for Muhammad. And so she prepares some roasted sheep and loads it up with poison and goes and sets it down in front of Muhammad and his companions. And Muhammad, tactical genius that he was, said, "Oh, I just slaughtered this woman's entire family, and she's making me meal. Hey, this is great. Wow, yeah, I love sheep. Yo, it's yummy, yummy." And and of course, Muhammad then sees one of his followers drop down dead in front of him, turns green and drops dead. Muhammad spits out the food, says, I have received a revelation. The angel Gabriel's telling me that this food is poison." So he actually survives, but uh, the poison does some sort of internal damage. Other Muslims don't understand this. Whenever we bring this up, they say, "Oh, he couldn't have died from the poison." Muhammad said repeatedly that he was dying from the poison. Muhammad, when he's dying, says that it's the poison that was killing him. So if you don't think it's the poison that killed him, great. Muhammad was wrong or a liar or something like that. And we can't believe anything Muhammad said. Muhammad said he was dying from the poison. But here's the idea. If you drink a bottle of Drano, you'll die pretty quickly. If you drink some Drano, you might survive, but it might do all kinds of internal damage to you that leads to ongoing infections and eventually kills you due to organ problems and so on. But according to Muslim sources, that's what happened. Muhammad gets some of the poison in his system. He spits it out, but it must have been something caustic because they said they could, even years later, they could see the effect of it on his mouth. When Muhammad would open his mouth, they say they could see the effects of the poison. So it was something that did internal damage to him, and he eventually dies from. So it's just amazing that Muslims use this as their example. Ha ha, we're going to get you Jews. We're going to kill. It's like, wait a minute, that got your prophet killed. That caused your prophet to spend years in agony because his internal organs were dissolved because of this poison. And you're bragging because of it. That's what happened because of the retaliation. That woman never would have thought of poisoning Muhammad anywhere in her life until you showed up and slaughtered her family. Then she decided she's going to take this guy out. And so it's so short-sighted. Ha ha, we killed you. Ha, just like we killed the Jews of Khaybar. Yeah, and they took out your prophet. Was it worth it? Was it worth losing? Was killing those Jews worth losing your prophet? Because that's what it sounds like you're saying.
But of course, what they mean is we're going to commit genocide. We're going to kill you all. And it's astonishing to me how common this chant is because nobody knows what it means. I remember a few years back, there was a very minor episode compared to this where Hamas was firing rockets into Israel from Gaza, and Israel took some actions to retaliate and to stop them. And there was a demonstration, pro-Israel demonstration in New York City. I was there at the time. I went, and across the street there were the Palestinian demonstrators chanting Khaybar, Khaybar, Ya Yahud. And I thought, this is astonishing. They're saying we're going to kill the Jews here, and nobody cares. Nobody even knows that's what they're saying.
Yeah, and notice how this ties into what the guy from Al Azhar said, right? Like we're familiar with that Khaybar saying, but haven't heard that in a while, right? It's like they have breathed life into their goals of exterminating people, and then so now someone from Al Azhar can say, "Hey, all of this breathed life into us. It breathed life into all these Muslims who are now screaming for more bloodshed and more killing and so on." Mm-hmm. That Al Azhar now reminds me of Uncle Joe from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. This guy had been laying in bed for 20 years, just giving up on life. And then he finds out he got a golden ticket to the chocolate factory. And all of a sudden he jumps up and starts dancing around and singing. That's Al Azhar.
20 years lying there, an invalid, making deals with Pope Francis. And then suddenly he leaps up full of life again. All right. Let's see. In Germany, the demonstrators got rowdy and started picking up paving stones and throwing them at the cops. And so somehow they considered that showing solidarity with the Hamas jihadis and also involved their attacking the authorities in Germany itself, their new home where they have been welcomed as seekers of asylum. Very strange, no, David?
Mm-hmm. Very, very weird.
Yeah, I just don't understand it. Anyway, meanwhile, we have Fatah also saying, strike the sons of apes and pigs. I thought they were fighting Israelis. What do the apes and pigs have to do with it?
Yeah, well, Allah at various times has transformed Jews into things. I just posted, it was like early this morning, I posted one of them because there are all sorts of variations of this. But Muhammad, he performed this awesome scientific experiment where he said, "Hey, a rat won't drink camel milk, but it will drink sheep's milk. Who's not allowed to drink camel milk? Well, that's the Jews, because it's part of their dietary restrictions on camels." And so he said, "You see, these rats are actually Jews that
You
Allah has
see?
transformed into rats." And he performed a scientific experiment to show them you can put different kinds of milk in front of them; it will eat. These rats are entirely kosher. They're tired. They eat kosher. That's it. He's actually arguing that. It's like, even though Allah transformed these Jews into rats, they still follow Jewish dietary restrictions. They still are kosher. And you look at that and say, are you insane, dude? But no, that's the way it happened. In fact, if I recall, I think that Muhammad is trying to figure out what Allah has transformed Jews into, and he said some different things over time. And I think at the end that it was the apes and pigs.
You know, that actually is reminiscent of a story that Admiral Sir Richard Burton tells. You know Richard Burton, not Liz Taylor's husband, but
That's what I
the
was thinking of.
the 19th century explorer. Richard Burton was an English adventurer essentially, and he wanted to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, but he didn't want to. He wasn't even a Muslim, although he may have converted. It's a little bit unclear, but he didn't want to go as a convert, even if he were one, because he knew that a Western convert they'd make a big deal out of and give him the first class treatment. So he decided to pose as a native Muslim. Now he worked for years to pull this off. This is in the late 1840s, because he wrote his book in 1852, and he went to Cairo in the garb of a Pashtun from Afghanistan, because he figured Afghanistan is so far away from here. And of course, this is before modern travel. None of these people have met an Afghan, so he figured that would account for his accent if he had one in Arabic. He worked very hard to speak Arabic fluently, but he knew that there would be some ways he still wasn't a native. So he passed himself off as an Afghan physician, and he actually had people coming to him and getting medicine from him in 19th century medicine. You know, leeches! I don't know. But anyway, he ultimately... it's a great book he writes. Personal narrative of a pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina. Lots of wonderful stories, great adventures. One time this Albanian soldier comes on leave to Cairo and they get drunk, and it's this big scandal that the Pashtun doctor has gotten drunk and he has to leave the city. But anyway, he makes the pilgrimage to Mecca, and he's getting led into Arabia by a guide who's a native of Arabia, and he sees these monkeys that he doesn't recognize. Now, this is a guy who's been all over the world, and he's very interested in the natural world. He knows apes, and he says, "What is this kind of monkey? I've never seen this kind of monkey before." And they say, "Oh, that's a Jew." And he said that they actually take seriously there in 1851 or whatever in Arabia, that there are these monkeys running around in the Arabian desert who are the actual descendants of the Jews who were transformed into apes by Allah. And anyway, I don't know if they're
Yep.
still there, but they were there then. Okay, David, it is getting to be the final quarter of our show. Let's go to some stupid infidels, one of the main stupid infidels of the week is the Black Lives Matter movement, which expressed solidarity with the Hamas terrorists, and I mean the Hamas terrorists. I do not mean the Palestinians, and then they deny that it has anything to do with Hamas, as many people have been doing. Because, of course, in one notorious incident, the Hamas terrorists paraglided into a music festival that was taking place near the border of Israel with Gaza. And then they massacred the men there, they took the women captive, and sowed misery in every way. Now, Black Lives Matter actually tweeted and put out on Facebook an image of a paraglider. And
with
so
the
they were
with the flag on it.
with the Palestinian flag on it, that's right, saying, I stand with Palestine. So what they're saying is, I support the massacres of innocent people in at a music festival in Israel. And so this was an appalling display of bloodlust and hatred, and they received a tremendous backlash and took it all down. But the damage is done. It's very clear. It's not as if they have changed their views. And of course, they're by no means alone. We have many. Yes?
Oh, I just wanted to point out, I mean, think Hamas, these Hamas jihadis paragliding over the defensive fences to go and kill Jews. But I mean, they've been building tunnels underneath the fences. They were bulldozing going through the fences. They're paragliding over the fences. I mean, all of this ingenuity. Imagine if they applied any of that ingenuity and that dedication to anything other than killing Jews in the name of Allah.
Yeah, Gaza is actually a beautiful place. They could make it into practically a new French Riviera on the Mediterranean if they weren't just so dedicated to killing Jews. It could be a really a paradisal place on earth. I kid you not. It's a beautiful area, and even when the Israelis withdrew from it in 2005, Mortimer Zuckerman, the publisher of the New York Post, spent $14 million to buy the greenhouses that the Jews had been operating in Gaza, gave them to the Palestinians, said, here, now you have a gainful employ, you can run these greenhouses, now that there'll be peace and you won't be fighting jihad, you can do this. And they gutted the greenhouses and made them into weapon smuggling tunnels. So,
Yeah, and and think about this. I mean, even if you just drop the idea that you have to go on a killing spree, and then you just said, okay, we're gonna focus on building up our country and making it a nice spot. I mean, lots of the places in these areas are important, would be important, like tourist spots for, especially for people who are interested in biblical history and so on, and want to go see the land and so on. My goodness, you'd have a constant influx of money from tourists who want to go see these things, and my
yeah.
you could you could do all this really, really quick. Like, stop trying to wipe this other group off the map. That's all you have to do, and your people would be fine. And they can't do it.
Yep. Okay, more stupid infidels. We have Aiden Ross. I had never heard of Aiden Ross before this. I don't know if you know who Aiden Ross is, David. Aiden Ross is described in the relevant news articles as a kick streamer. I don't know what the heck a kick streamer is either. I'm 61 here. I this means nothing to me.
Oh, I had to look up if that's the same Aiden.
Oh, you know this guy?
He was oh my goodness, what a weirdo. He's a guy who runs around with like Sneeko, and he was Andrew Tate's favorite fanboy for a while.
That explains it.
There's
he's going to give $1 million to the Palestinians.
Yeah, there's the creepiest thing I've ever seen in my life, and I've seen some creepy stuff. But he was actually they had a camera running where he was in his room being lectured and instructed by Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate telling him how to be a top G and so on. But Andrew Tate's sitting there in his little Daisy Dukes, talking to Aiden Ross, telling him how to do everything. Andrew Tate gets up to use the bathroom, and Aiden Ross runs over and smells the spot where Tate's crotch was on the chair. He just walks over and starts sniffing it like Joe Biden sniffing a 7-year-old girl. And so, like, the creepiest thing ever, like, what? Wait, Andrew Tate is telling you how to be a real man, a top G, and you're sitting there smelling his crotch when he gets up to go to the bathroom.
My goodness, this is horrible.
So that's the sort of real winners you're dealing with here, Robert.
So he's given $1 million to the Palestinians, and Andrew Tate himself
and $1 million sniffs.
He's only kicking in $200,000, Andrew himself. But I understand the affinity. I mean, obviously, their idea of masculinity is a kind of barbaric caricature of genuine masculinity anyway, and we can see that with how Andrew Tate mistreats women, and so I suppose it's not surprising that they would admire bloodthirsty, murderous jihadis. David, we now have 10 minutes. I'm going to go to some non-Israel stories. This is one that was very sad. This is, let me get her here. This lady her name is Sitar Mazhar Khan. And she has been charged. She is in Texas, in Kingwood, Texas. You can see from her 10-gallon hijab. And she is being charged with beating, choking, and burning her teenage daughter. She was upset with her for not wearing the hijab, which she found from a Facebook photo or an Instagram photo or something or other, that the poor daughter was going off to school and taking off the hijab. And she burned the pita bread. So she was beaten and burned and choked by her mother. And you know what I thought about this when I read this story is that this poor lady probably was raised in exactly the same way by her mother.
Yep.
And that this is just a cycle of terror and abuse that comes from the fact that the only tool that Islam prescribes to deal with anything is terror. Strike terror in the enemies of Allah. If women are disobedient, beat them. It's all based on fear and terror.
People try to leave Islam, kill them. Yeah, everything is chopping off body parts or murdering or lashing.
Yeah.
The solution for it. Violence is the solution for everything in Islam.
Exactly. And so we have this stupid infidel. This is...
He looks stupid.
He is. He's very stupid. His name is Mikhail Ekval.
Look at his head. He even bumped into a wall because that's how stupid he is.
He didn't... It wasn't a wall he bumped into.
Oh.
It was an Afghan Muslim migrant that he bumped into. He is a Swedish politician in Jönköping, Sweden. And he is pro-open borders. And so one of the people that is in the country, courtesy of Mikhail Ekval, has beaten him up in a fine display of gratitude. It seems notable that this has not changed his stance on these issues.
Of course not. If your stance is based on going against the evidence, the overwhelming evidence, then the evidence is not going to change your position. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Anyway, there's quite a bit more that is going on. Let me just ban this guy real quick. There we go. And one of the stories is a chilling indication, actually, out of France, that what we saw in Israel over the last few days is on its way west. And that was the Berith Shalom Synagogue in Paris. They went to get their messages on their answering machine last week, and there was a man who had left a message saying, "On the Quran of Mecca, I will come with an explosive belt to your synagogue and blow everything up." Now, why would he mention the Quran of Mecca, David? Surely, isn't that a book of peace that is contradicting his threat to blow up the synagogue?
Of of course, Robert. You go to. I mean, it's right there, as plain as day, in Surah 2, that anyone who believes in God and does good, including the Jews, is totally fine with Allah. So I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's very strange. But in any case, yes, he said on the Quran of Mecca, which was interesting because Mecca, the surahs of the Quran are divided into the Meccan and Medinan in Islamic tradition, and the Meccan ones are generally more tolerant and peaceful, at least relatively, and yet he's swearing by the Quran of Mecca to blow up the synagogue. Very strange. We have out of Vienna a similar story to that of the one out of Texas, a girl beaten up for not wearing hijab, but she was not beaten by her parents. She was beaten by the Sharia police, who are now walking around with impunity in Vienna and enforcing Islamic law upon the Muslims. What do you think that they think Vienna is going to be like in 5 years or 10 years, David?
Yeah, we've seen this over and over again. The Sharia patrols and things like that, where
Mm-hmm.
they will always. The goal is always to enforce and impose Sharia to whatever extent you can. If you dominate a society, then you can go all out and enforce full Sharia. If you can't, even if you're 1% of the population, like here in the U.S., you try to impose it in the same way. So you try to silence critics of Islam by labeling them Islamophobes or things like that. But you notice it's the same goal. We want to control what you are able to say about our religion. So you could do that in various ways. And it's basically in areas where they're convinced that they can walk around with a Sharia patrol and start enforcing some things. They will start doing it.
And it's the weakness of the infidels, the stupidity of the infidels that enables that. And another story out of Germany, right next door, it emphasizes this. It's the story of a man identified only as Firas A, and he is from Syria, but he now lives in Germany. And he got angry. He lives in Hamburg. And he was detained a couple times for driving without a license. And apparently, he got so irritated at being stopped by police for driving without a license that he decided nobody else was going to be driving either. And he took a hammer and he smashed 245 car windows. Now, this story I find it amazing, David. It takes a while to smash 245 car windows. And yet nobody seems to have stopped him or called the police. The
That would
police didn't show up.
be Islamophobic to stop him, Robert. Come on.
Yeah, and so even when he was finally arrested, and he also attacked an 84-year-old pensioner in the meantime, the judge released him. They said they found no grounds to hold him.
Notice the because you got the parallels. I mean, that's the same as like the UK grooming gangs, right? Like, hey, these guys are grooming, raping, pimping, drugging, all this stuff, one girl after another. But we don't want to jump in. You don't want to be the guy who jumps in and stops them because that would be Islamophobic. And so
Mm-hmm.
just let them keep going, let them keep going. Otherwise, you're an Islamophobe.
And so it is the weakness and the stupidity of the authorities that is enabling this and emboldening this. And actually, it was the same in Israel that if the Israelis had been more vigilant, more careful, not deceived. Now, of course, that's easy to say in hindsight, and I'm aware of what they're up against. But it was their weakness that the jihadis were able to exploit. And it's the weakness in the West that the jihadis are able to exploit. And so, what we all need to do to deal with this is strive to be strong. Strong in our convictions, strong in our resistance into the intimidation and violence of the jihadis, and strong to defend what is right and what is good. What do you think, David?
Uh, it's amazing because Islam is actually pretty easy to deal with if you just aren't a sniveling coward who constantly backs down from things, right?
That's it.
It's actually, I mean, Western nations are massively more powerful than these guys. Islam does an awful job at building places where anyone wants to live. There's like there's like no real competition here. It's just everyone in the West is like it goes back to that old saying where if you get conquered by these guys, it's you conquered yourself first. You have
Mm.
to. Same thing with the Roman Empire. No one could have conquered the Roman Empire if the Roman Empire weren't deteriorating from within on its own. And so, pretty easy to deal with jihadis. Pretty easy to deal with everything moving forward. It's pretty simple. But not if you're just going to be a sniveling coward who constantly backs down from people who are raping and pimping girls and smashing car windows and paragliding over fences to slaughter people at concerts and so on. Yeah, that's where we
So
are.
that's it. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Don't be a sniveling coward who constantly backs down. Stand up.
You heard it here.
It's not going to be easy, but it's essential. There really is no other alternative. So stand up this week. Resist jihad. Pray, hope, and don't worry. And God willing, we'll be back next week. We hope there will be no more jihad to talk about, in which case we will discuss the latest developments in jazz music. But otherwise, we'll probably be talking jihad. See you then.